Okay. Anyone else?
This is Ronesh, and Ronesh is my first time since I become United States citizen voting. So I'm very, very excited. And
oh, wonderful.
And I did for
Great.
a week.
Great.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, congratulations.
After
That's
2 weeks.
great.
So a book club that Jack and Joe and Ray and John and I are involved in, we were reading the White Too Long book. Wow. What an indictment of the American churches.
Wow.
And it showed that you are statistically more likely to hold racist views the more regularly you attend church.
That's true.
Okay. And so I don't know what that says about the rest of us here.
Joe, a little later in the meeting, I'm going to make a request of any people who are thinking of reading White Too Long or who have read it, that I think will help us with what we're doing in the group. Thanks so much for reading it. Peggy, would you like to say a few words and also share our focus for this evening as you open up?
Sure. Thank you all for joining us again, and a special thank you to those who sent their suggestions for proceeding. We really appreciate it. There were many great ideas, and listening had the most votes, and we were asked to define the basics. So tonight we will build the foundation for future discussions and discuss structural racism as a result of white supremacy. You may be like I was. I didn't begin struggling with these ideas until last year. So we will continue on our journey by looking at key terms used in discussions about racism and sharing practical definitions and descriptions. We will give examples as we go. Please share your examples and know that this is a safe space. And I did get the recording working, so we are being recorded.
Great.
Your thoughts and personal examples and questions are especially welcome. And as we grow on our journey, your input should increase and Skip's and mine should decrease. So the terms we will discuss tonight are racism, white supremacy, structural racism, systemic and institutional racism, cultural racism, and personal racism. And I know it sounds like a lot, but there will be redundancy in the content as we get comfortable with these terms. So racism. Racism is the belief that groups of humans possess different behavioral traits and intellectual capabilities corresponding to physical appearance, and can be divided based on the superiority of one group over another. It's more than racial prejudice, hatred, or discrimination. It involves one group with power that carries out systemic discrimination through institutional policies and practices of society, and by shaping cultural beliefs and values that support those racist policies and practices. We will explore some of these. As we know, the notion of race is itself a social construct. We all trace back to one maternal mitochondrial Eve, and our interactions over millennia mean no pure strain of us exists. Now, I had to ask Skip to define mitochondrial for me, but think in terms of genetics. So we have more in common than we have differences, but society invents and manipulates social and political constructs when convenient, like redlining or the Electoral College that decided whose votes count. Redlining was intentionally denying mortgage loans to people from zip codes with Black majorities. It was across the United States. And how was wealth passed on from generation to generation? Real estate. And while many whites were building equity in homes, Blacks were paying rent. Racism chooses to ignore our likeness and assigns characteristics to whole groups to advance the idea of race and superiority of whiteness. It's so embarrassing to know that Nazi Germany looked to the United States to see how we kept one group contained for centuries to plan their eradication of the Jews. So our first slide will show when one group has social and institutional power, they have access to resources. Think money, think the slave labor that kept those profitable plantations going. They had the ability to influence others. Think again, who was the boss? Who had the money? They had access to decision makers for action. Who was in Congress? Who was in all the boardrooms? They had ability to define reality for self and for others. So who wrote the news? Who was on the news? And who wrote the history books? What are a couple of examples of some of these? What falls under these four things? Can you give us some examples? Oh, remember to unmute yourself.
I have one.
Great.
The Tulsa Black community was totally eradicated out in Oklahoma City.
Mm-hmm.
It was a very affluent Black community. And we whites went in there and just cleaned it out, which was absolutely horrible. And we didn't hear about it until just this past year or two.
And when was it done?
And this was done back in what, the 1950s, 40s,
No, earlier.
maybe earlier than that.
Yeah, very early. It was right at as Jim Crow was really catching on, the
Yeah.
early 1900s. Did you
But
hear
it was-
that they found their graves? It was on the news this morning. They located, they think, the burial site in Tulsa.
Any others?
Well, I think that access to resources is like education. We know that the schools in the city are very poorly funded, and therefore that education is substandard. And so they don't get, and they don't have resources to good grocery stores. Just so many things are not in their neighborhood because businesses won't go in there and set up.
Mhm.
One of the, in past that I was just reading, they brought up that when Black schools were formed, and if they were hiring, and let's say they had two candidates they were hiring, they were asked to hire the
You
one
found the volume?
least qualified.
You found the volume? On the speaker?
Jody?
Yes.
Jody, are you finished?
There-
Do you want to say the end again, Jody?
Yeah,
Because
we missed
somebody else
the
was
end.
talking, so I muted them.
Yeah.
So there were a couple candidates that they were hiring for this Black school. They were told to hire the one that was least competent.
Wow.
My God.
Wow. Janice.
There was a series of podcasts called Nice White Parents recently and talked about how since the 1960s, they followed this one particular school in New York City and showed how just the intervention of white parents in the school changed the whole direction of the school in terms of what was available to Black kids, what was available to white kids. It was a
Amazing.
really interesting, it was five shows.
Wow.
Yeah.
In the 70s?
it started, the school started in 1968.
Okay.
I was going to mention in the early 70s, when I worked at the city housing department, we used block grant funding to fight redlining in the outer city where people were trying to buy homes and try to leave the inner city in those days.
Hmm.
When I first saw this, I thought about ability to influence others and access to decision makers as kind of high-minded, you know, you have access to really, but I was thinking while we were talking, it's also access in a very simple kind of way. I don't have any qualms about going up to a store owner and contesting a price or returning an item that is defective if the person is white. You know, when I drove through Mississippi and work in those communities, I never had to think about what if I get pulled over and I was going to stay with a person whose trailer had been shot up because he dared as a black candidate to run for office.
Hmm.
So there's simple access. It's not just you can access the president or the head of the bank. It's that you've got this ability, this white privilege, to just go up to white people and contest what's going on.
Hmm.
I can give a personal example. It happened to me about 37 years ago. I was working at the Bureau of Purchases in Baltimore City, and I had a breakdown, and I spent some time in the hospital, and I got out of the hospital ready to go back to work, and my boss decided that I wasn't good enough or wasn't capable enough to continue working, and so I was fired. So, and that was the best job I ever had too. So yeah, people can, and the reason he fired me and a coworker had mentioned this. He said if I was white, there would have been no problem with me continuing there working, but so it was just because of my race. So those things happen, at least back then, and I imagine they still happen in some places.
Yeah.
That's perfect, Dennis, because we're now going to talk about white supremacy.
Peg, I was just
Another thing that I didn't know about was in the sports world. I'm not very sports minded, but I just read about somebody who is in a major league or in one of the very highest of the school leagues, the college leagues and stuff, that they have a black quarterback. And that has been a position apparently that has never before been allowed, you know. And of course, in the baseball world, there was a whole separate league for a long time for any black players.
Right, the Negro League.
Yeah.
That's right. I wanted to give a couple of historical examples that are kind of close to home. The difficulty that Black Americans have getting home mortgages and bank funds for starting businesses in general. About the time that I went to work for the Reginald Lewis Museum, remember when Wells Fargo was caught not for refusing loans to African Americans, but for jacking up the interest rates so high that they were unjust? And that's how I was able to get the president of Wells Fargo for the Maryland area on my board. In the 80s, the other one, this is a very interesting example. Remember when Texaco was either the late 80s or early 90s, was outed for its poor showing and its inequitable hiring practices of African Americans at the mid and upper level management positions? Some of you remember that? A friend of mine had just attended Harvard Business School. He was instrumental in helping the NAACP move beyond the demonstration plus apology equals reconciliation falsehood that Peggy discussed last week. by using his Harvard case study training to predict everything Texaco was going to say at the meeting between Texaco and the Black leaders over the lack of real employment equity at the mid and upper levels. And basically everything that he trained the NAACP people and the other leaders to expect happened. And he also told them what they should say to each one. So the first thing was that the CEO would tout about Texaco's donations to the NAACP of about $2 million a year. And their response was to thank him, but to say that amounted to less than 0.5% of Texaco's gross resources. So it was certainly appreciated, but it wasn't that big a deal. Then he had said the CEO was likely to say that he was new, therefore any of the racial practices wasn't really ascribable to him and he'd be different. And they were able to point out, again, predicting it, that he was new as CEO, but he'd been there at Texaco for more than 23 years. So he was very much a part of the culture of Texaco. They had predicted that at some point, he would just say, well, if you all are going to demonstrate or whatever, just go ahead and do your worst. And that he would feel comfortable in doing that because most of Texaco's holdings were in Europe, 91% or more. So what little they had over here wouldn't be hurt by demonstrations. And their answer they were ready for was, oh, but that's not what we were thinking of doing. We were thinking of encouraging movement for a worldwide boycott of Texaco, such as occurred with apartheid. And they said the CEO sat back in the chair and took a breath and said, what do you want? Then at that point, they were able to move beyond the apology equals reconciliation and begin to spell out, we want X percentage of people being trained, we want, and they went down a list of things that really would begin to make a difference in the corporate operation of Texaco. Final thing I wanted to say is, did you all notice how everything on Peggy's chart could parallel for gender discrimination?
Yes.
Sure.
Power.
The same uses of power.
Yep.
Yes.
Skip, if I might, I'm not sure where this one goes, but it's big for me.
Sure.
It continues to happen as we speak. It probably comes under the third one, but it's voter suppression. I think that's huge and it's happening today.
Yes.
Beautiful example.
Yeah, started with the Electoral College and it's still happening. So pathetic. Ugh.
Can I say something there?
Please.
I had to go from my desktop to my iPhone. I'm sorry, I can't see you all. But there was an excellent article in the paper the other day. Lynching conference finds links to voter suppression. And what they said was that before the emancipation, there weren't too many lynchings because the African Americans were property and they didn't want to destroy their property. It was only after the civil rights emancipation. And the reason for that was it was messaging, letting the Black people know that they were inferior and it didn't rise to, and see what white supremacy is all about. If you think about it, the white may be on a scale of 1 to 10, and the Black can only get to a 6 or 7 because of white power holding it down. And a lot of times this happens in, as we mentioned in the book, in the white churches, suburban churches and the like. So if you look upon what's taking place with the Jim Crow laws, as well as the voter suppression, it's messaging that scare tactics to keep people from carrying out their duties. So lynching actually is, if you think about it, it's like the equivalent of voter suppression. And I didn't understand that until now, that lynching did not take place before emancipation, only afterwards, and it was mostly to let people know that by hanging and other tactics that they had stay in line, or else they would be either punished or not recognized, and all things down the line.
Absolutely.
Ray, thank you. I had not made that connection either. That was a tremendous insight, actually,
Yeah.
both of them that you shared. Thank you.
Yeah.
Which is a perfect lead in also to white supremacy, which is our next definition. So it's the idea that white people and their ideas, thoughts, beliefs, and actions are superior to people of color and their ideas, thoughts, beliefs, and actions. While most associate white supremacy with extremist groups like Ku Klux Klan and the neo-Nazis, white supremacy is ever present in our institutional and cultural assumptions that assign value, morality, goodness, and humanity to the white group, while casting people and communities of color as worth less, immoral, bad, inhuman, or undeserving. Drawing from critical race theory, the term white supremacy also refers to political or socioeconomic systems where white people enjoy structural advantage and rights that other racial and ethnic groups do not, both at a collective and an individual basis. So Skip, how does this differ from white privilege?
Well, you know, all of this is so fluid, Peggy, but the way I see it is this way. Supremacy, white supremacy is sort of like the root, the tuber, if you were planting a potato or whatever, the seed, if you're planting other kinds of plants. It's the whole psychological underpinning and that basically carries the belief of supremacy. And then everything that grows from that is privilege. All the different ways the plant grows or flowers are evidences of white privilege because the assumption is supremacy. One of my favorite simple definitions of white privilege is Stokely Carmichael's, who's now Kwame Ture, who makes the rules? And the other way he expresses that is who always has the default standard. So on whatever basis you make a judgment or value, the default standard always falls to what the white valuation or what the white standard is. So who make the rules? What's the default standard? It's never the standard for a minority.
Power plus prejudice equals oppression. So structural racism is our next slide. And structural racism encompasses the entire system of white domination, diffused and infused in all aspects of society, including its history, culture, politics, economics, and entire social fabric. Structural racism is more difficult to locate in a particular institution because it involves the reinforcing effects of multiple institutions and cultural norms, past and present, continually reproducing old and producing new forms of racism. Germany had it easy after the war. They could just dismantle the system that they had just built. They constructed it just to eradicate the Jews. So they made it against the law after the war to display a swastika with a penalty of up to 3 years in prison. And they gave restitution to Holocaust survivors. And what did we do after the Civil War? Not only did we not ban the Confederate flag, but Mississippi had it as part of its state flag until this year. We passed laws that freed the slaves, but what did they have to live on? Restitution went to the slave owners. And government reparations have never moved beyond discussions. Germany had imprisoned the Jews, but the United States, the slaves were the labor needed to maintain our economy. Structural racism is the most profound and pervasive form of racism. All other forms emerge from it. We will discuss 3 of them: cultural, institutional, and personal. Power plus prejudice equals oppression. So our next definition is cultural racism, the ways in which the dominant culture is founded upon and then defines reality and shapes norms, values, beliefs, and standards to advantage white people and oppress people of color. Examples: the thin, blonde white woman. That was the basis of our society's standard of beauty. And women on welfare were assumed to be Black or brown and portrayed as irresponsible, while white collar fraud in the business community is costing the United States billions of dollars a year. Why? Power plus prejudice equals oppression. Then we have institutional or systemic racism, which is our next slide. Ways in which institutional policies and practices create different outcomes for different racial groups. They may not mention any racial group, but their effect is to create advantages for whites and disadvantages for people of color. The idea that one group is better than another and has the right to control the other gets embedded in the institutions of society, the laws, the legal system, police practice, the educational system, hiring practices, public policy, housing development, media images, political power, et cetera, et cetera. Why is 1 out of 4 African-American men in jail or on probation? And why are environmental hazards disproportionately in communities of color? And what is the long-term effect of redlining? So how do we dismantle racism in a society that has encapsulated it in every artery? It's not easy. Power plus prejudice equals oppression. My sister had a great example of our white privilege that never occurred to me. Jody, would you mind sharing that?
Black teachers happened to mention that she could never find eyeglasses that fit her. And she didn't know why until she was speaking with an Asian woman who said, oh no, that's because they're not made for our faces. And my friend Lois has a flat face and her eyes are a little spread out. And she said, yeah, their glasses are just made for white people. And that had never dawned on me. And I call it, although Skip just gave me a new term, I've always just thought of that as white normalcy. Like what I consider normal is actually only normal for me because I'm white, but goes right back to what Skip was saying about the default standard. Because I'm white, I never even recognized that. It's pretty insidious.
That's perfect, Jody. I mean, that's exactly what it is. The default is the white standard. And Peggy and everyone, I'd like to show how, as you begin to string all these things together, how reinforcing institutional racism can be. So let's go back to the example that we began with much earlier, redlining. Okay, if you look at redlining, basically the value of property in Black neighborhoods that are redlined is much less. Therefore, concentrated wealth among Black people is less. I think right now the estimate is that solid middle-class white family has about $171,000 in total wealth. I guess the property, everything, adding everything, versus $17,600 to the Black family. Lower property values lead to less tax-based dollars. Well, school systems are funded based on the value of the property taxes in neighborhoods. So there you go, your lower quality schools. Lower quality schools will lead to lower post-secondary schooling and so on. As a matter of fact, predictions are made about the number of prison cells you're going to need in like certain areas of East Baltimore, for instance, based on third grade scores. So if they know by the end of the third grade which kids are slipping behind seriously, you can predict a percentage of that number that will wind up being incarcerated eventually and begin plotting your prison growth. Pretty frightening. So the lower education leads to lower post-secondary education, leads to incarceration. And then all the other small things reinforce some of those major things that are really strung together if you think about it. Customs, judgment about hair, names. We had a discussion with my son, Justin, a couple months back. He was upset that we had named him Justin instead of Jamal. And I said, well, one reason was we wanted your resume to get read.
Sad but true.
Yeah.
Would anyone else have any examples they'd like to share?
I would like to share something.
Great.
So I went to Mercy High School. And of course, when I went there in the 60s, there was maybe 1 or 2 Black people. Now it has a pretty good percentage of Black girls. Well, what happened this year was after the George Floyd incident and others, the Black girls and alumni formed a group, a social media group, Black at Mercy. And they were sharing their painful experiences at Mercy High School. This is like real, like right now.
Mm-hmm.
And then I guess when the administration found out about it, they sent a letter out and told us all about it. But they started listening sessions and they've been working all summer. And so now there's a meeting on Monday, which I'm going to go to, virtual, and find out about what was, what was the complaint, everything about it. So that's just an example right now.
Beautiful.
Thank
Beautiful
you.
example. Thank you.
But yet, Kathy, the letter that they sent out started off with talking about the resources that they had committed to subsidizing the tuition of most of the Black students.
Well,
Evelyn Cannon wrote a letter to the editor of Sun Paper pointing that out.
I didn't see that.
Yeah.
That was about Catholic high school and other places too with its problems.
So a couple of things came to mind. I think added to the list of, I was thinking as you were talking about white supremacy and then the different places where we see it institutionalized, et cetera. The one thing that needs to get added to that is in religion and faith communities. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I just remembered, during apartheid in South Africa, the white Afrikaners taught in their communities from childhood all the way through their churches that they were superior, and they used the Bible in order to justify and prove that. And I'm sure that happened in the South here as well, elsewhere, right? So that was built in within religion across the board. And the thing that came to mind for me was South Africa. The other thing in terms of examples that I was thinking, Skip, as you were giving your examples, I just learned this year, and I may have said this before, that how the census is structured, which deprives communities of resources. So for example, people of color from, let's say, Baltimore City, right, are incarcerated out of state or upstate in rural areas. They don't get counted in Baltimore City. They get counted in those rural towns, which then, first of all, distorts the fact, it makes it look more diverse than those towns really are, right? And then, of course, increases the numbers of people.
It's Hagerstown and it's Wacomico or
in Somerset?
Yes, Somerset. I couldn't think of that. Yes,
so
Somerset.
I just learned that, and that is a huge structural, I think, example of structural racism.
That's perfect. I never thought of that, but that's exactly true. Wow.
And just to follow up on that huge example, Jer,
I was thinking of a number of examples in my lifetime, and I thought this would be quite poignant, this one example, and it still somewhat haunts me. I graduated law school in '82, and that was a feat in itself, I think, because that is rigorous, as Joe will tell you, that's some rigorous stuff, but I was pleased to sit there with my mother and my father, and then, surprisingly, my name got called to receive an award, and I was in shock. My father made a joke and pulled the award out and said, "Sucker." That was his sense of humor. I still don't understand what he meant. Maybe there's a little rivalry there, who knows? But anyway, the award was the William P. Cunningham Award. And I was so pleased. I'd helped the school and I'd served the school, had some friends, lots of friends. It was for service and achievement. But either that day, it's a little cloudy now, or a week later, I think it was that day, yes, as I look back, a professor came up to me and said, "Man, if he knew you got that award, he'd turn over in his grave." So I was in shock. I said, "Why?" And he told me that the man was a racist. Now, the reason I brought that up is because here I was, one of the Black students in Maryland's law school where Thurgood wasn't let in, and I was receiving an award for my service and achievement, which was wonderful. And by the way, another young lady received it, and she was African American. But for that man to say that to me, I think just enshrouds or really encapsulates how deeply, the cultural, the structural, the institutional notions are wrapped up, especially when you look at the institution of law. So I carry that, and I'd love to see that professor again so we can have a further conversation and wonder, see how he felt about it. But that was something that I literally hid in the back of my mind. But when Skip and Peggy asked me to come up with something, I scanned the prospects, and that was one that I thought could bring us, some reason to continue our work.
Yeah. Among many thousands of reasons, right?
Yes. And I have the award if you guys ever want to see it. It's real.
Bring it to the next meeting set when you can hold it up on camera. We can all see it.
Where did you put it?
What'd you say?
Where did you put it?
What'd you say, Skip?
Where did you put it?
It's on my desk, and I had it nicely laminated by this company. I'm proud of it. You know that. And I think William P. Cunningham is.
And we're proud of you, Selwyn.
And just a minor note, Cunningham was succeeded by Mike Kelly, who's a member of our congregation.
Yes.
He really transformed the law school. And I was there when Cunningham was the dean, and your commentator's description was accurate.
Wow. Mike tells the story that when he was working at Maryland, they wanted to dedicate, I think, a building to Justice Marshall, and he contacted him about coming to the ceremonies, and he said he refused because he said they wouldn't even let me in to the school. I'm not coming to any ceremony there in the future. So.
Wow.
Thank you all for your examples. So we only have one more definition. Our last slide is personal racism. So personal racism, the ways in which we perpetuate and or assume the idea that white people are inherently better and or people of color are inherently inferior on an individual basis. The ways in which white people act out of racist implicit bias are numerous. It used to be that someone would call someone by a racist name, but now it's more like, "You're so articulate," making a racist assumption, or "You're the whitest Black kid I know." How insulting. So it would be easy to rationalize our own behavior and become defensive, but we need to own our complicity. Last month, Kathy asked if we were talking about other lives too, or just Black lives. And we commented that our white privilege has harmed Blacks more than anyone else. There was a great sign at a recent rally I went to, and it said, "All lives can't matter till Black lives matter."
Good.
And I thought that was so perfect. Now Skip will add a few more examples, but first, to the white person wondering if they're left out now, Skip, what was a great comment you made to me last week?
Oh, when you brought that up last week, I just said, Peggy, when did a white life not matter?
We have a long way to go.
Yes, we do. Now I'm looking, I think we can go through some of this. This is like just a little bunch of scenarios and just see how you would use the definitions we've used. Remember, this stuff is very fluid. There's a lot of redundancy, so there can be more than one kind of racism, but tell me what you see in each scenario as I read it to you. Number one, Augustus Tolton, born April 1st, 1851, a slave with his enslaved parents and owned by a Catholic family, escaped with his family in 1862 to Quincy, Illinois. There, Father McGirr saw to his education in an all-white parish school. Because no American seminary would accept a Black man when he graduated from Quincy College, Tolton was accepted for studies and ordained a priest in 1886 at 31 years old in Rome. He served as pastor of St. Joseph Church and School, but was reassigned to Chicago because of the rampant racism in Quincy. This first Black African-American priest was declared venerable by Pope Francis. What kinds of racism do you see there? So no American seminary would accept him. Is that institutional instruction?
That's institutional.
Mm-hmm.
That's institutional, but they've got a movie about him.
Oh.
I saw it like 2 years ago at one of the high schools here. And what surprised me the most was I was one of 2 white people in the audience, which I didn't see as being very good at all. I mean, there should have been a lot of other people in there that would have been able to understand what all of this is about. The city had a lot of cultural racism because you can't have a Catholic Black person as a priest. It just was a non-possibility.
That's right.
So yeah, it does overlap a lot of them.
Now, what about the rampant racism in Quincy? What kind of racism does that sound
Maybe
like?
we could get the film here first thing.
That would be a great idea.
That to me strikes me as
Yeah. What about personal racism? If you think of he had to leave Quincy.
Strikes me as, yes.
That work? Okay, scenario number 2. Charles Randolph Uncles, the first African-American priest ordained in the United States. Born November 8, 1859, lived with his parents in East Baltimore and attended St. Francis Xavier. He broke the color barrier and attended St. Mary's Seminary in 1891. Cardinal Gibbons ordained him at the cathedral in 1891. He taught at Epiphany College in Baltimore and in New Windsor, New York. He died on July 20th, 1933, believing himself an outcast because of racism in the society he helped to found, the Josephites. What do you see there?
Well, the church has had so much racism. There was a program on that I listened to this week, and the one was giving the history of the church and racism, naming all the bishops that had owned slaves and all the racism in the churches, and it went on and on. I mean, it was sickening to listen to, you know, just one after the other of racist things in our Catholic Church. It was pathetic, but yeah, why now on Sunday, they say it's the most racist time that the black churches are separate from the white churches. We
Most
should
segregated
merge
hour in
together.
America.
Yeah.
You're right.
So that would be institutional and personal.
Yes. Good, you're getting there. As Catholics left their parishes and homes for the suburbs during the civil rights era, it was not unusual for African Americans moving into the changing and redlined neighborhoods to meet resistance from some Catholic parishes. A line ascribed to the pastor of St. Bernardine's, Monsignor Vaith, was his promise to his congregation that Blacks would never cross the bridge at Edmondson Avenue and Hilton Street.
Wow.
What do you see there?
I think that's just an indication of all of this kind of racism means that there has to be a whole cognitive restructuring, that people have to think differently. At the same time that Monsignor Vaith was operating there, I belong to a small parish in Brooklyn, just across from Cherry Hill on the Hanover Street Bridge. And our pastor arranged for us to have community dinners with the parishioners of St. Veronica's in Cherry Hill, that we were to invite them to our parish dinners and we were to go to parish dinners in Cherry Hill. And this was at the same time that Monsignor Vaith was operating. But it just makes me think how we don't even know, and all of us have biases that we're not conscious of. And this is so excellent because it's giving us a sense to know that how we might think, and we might not be thinking as inclusive as we think we are.
Well, I grew up with Monsignor Vaith. He was a raging alcoholic idiot. And he did say that. And I'm sure that impacted a lot on the way people felt. Everybody was anxious to get out. It was a terrible, terrible time. But I mean, he shouldn't have been there. He hated Protestants as much as he hated Blacks. So.
I'm going to do one more, okay, Peggy?
Sure.
I alluded the last time we met to my personal story, so this scenario sort of involves that. Skip was accepted into St. Charles Seminary in 1959 and St. Mary's in 1962 on Packer Street. And I was the only Black student there throughout my 8.5-year stay. Had I been ordained, I would have been the first Black priest ordained for the archdiocese directly, and not as someone ordained to serve through an order. So for instance, the Josephites served St. Pius, the Josephites served St. Peter Claver, okay? Those were orders, and archdiocesan priests necessarily then didn't have to be in Black neighborhoods. At any rate, I had been in the seminary for a number of years as the only one, and I was met one day by a person named Paul Smith, a newly ordained priest, who took me out to lunch from Packer Street. And at lunch, he told me that he had just been ordained down south, but his home was Baltimore. He had wanted to be a priest for Baltimore, but he was told at the time that it was not the policy, there's your key word, the policy of the archdiocese to accept Black students for the priesthood. He asked if I would be the master of ceremonies at his first mass, and of course I was honored. He also told me that the new Archbishop of Baltimore, Lawrence Sheen, had come down to the state, which was a deep southern state. Every other place had denied him. DC said no, Raleigh said no, Richmond said no, Atlanta said no. So he was all the way down to Louisiana before Bishop took him, because that's where the Josephites were, and he would be able to serve a Black parish, right? But at any rate, he explained to me when he realized that I was so naive, I didn't know how I got there. And he reminded me that the person who baptized me, named Father Donahue, became a Monsignor and then was Chancellor for Education downtown. And when I went to Monsignor Donahue during my sophomore or junior year at City and said that I thought I wanted to be a priest, I had no idea. I just about the seminary or the system. He told me, that's wonderful, finish up at City, and we'll take it from there. So when I graduated from City, by that time, Archbishop Keogh was very, very ill, and everyone knew it. And Monsignor Donahue also had some clout being downtown. What Father Smith told me was that Monsignor Donahue simply asked, would the Archdiocese accept a parishioner from St. Edward's, which is one of the newly turning over parishes going from white to black. The assumption was that, of course, he was talking about a white seminarian, so they said yes. And then after that, the plan was to just basically keep me kind of sub-secret and my identity low, because they figured that Archbishop Keogh was about to answer to God for more substantive questions than my color of my skin. So by the time that Father Smith got ordained, Archbishop Sheen actually went to that ordination, and after he was ordained, Archbishop Sheen met him in the sacristy and said, Father, I regret with all my heart that you are not being ordained for your home Archdiocese of Baltimore. And if you give me permission, I will petition my brother bishop to excardinate you from here so that I can reincarnate you back home where you belong. Paul Smith said, no, they were the first to take me. They should have me. I never knew that story until, or how I really got in, really, until Father Smith shared that tale with me. So I will close by showing you what happens when you have really great leadership. Lawrence Sheen was appointed Archbishop for the Archdiocese in '61. He was responsible for several invitations supported by potential consequences, which promoted integration in Catholic institutions throughout the Archdiocese. He also tried to convince, as I mentioned, Father Smith. Finally, the Knights of Columbus, the Knights of Malta, which were segregated societies, several male Catholic high schools in the Archdiocese began graduating. Well, the Knights began accepting Black members in the 60s. The Catholic high schools, including the Jesuit one out on Charles Street, began accepting male Black high school students who graduated in '64. Okay, so was it coincidental that with Sheen's ascendancy in '61, and you begin to see Black students coming through schools and the Knights beginning to integrate in '64, about the time that he got his red hat? I think it was not a coincidence.
I just have one question. How could anybody turn away Skip? I mean, really, is that insane? Insane.
You didn't know what a rascal one was.
To know you is to love you, Skip.
Anyway, all you had to do was sing and they would love you.
There you go. They hadn't heard that yet.
So where does that put us, Peggy?
Well, you were going to, did you want to ask them about reading?
Yes, and we were going to make an announcement and then we'll close with the prayer, right?
Yeah, I had a couple things to say.
Yeah, so what I was going to ask, and I'm going to pitch this to Joe, who opened up by telling us about reading White Too Long. If there are others of you who would like to read the book within the next month, and I'll drop off my copy at the rectory, so there's one that you can just pick up if somebody wants it. It would be really neat if a few of you could sort of take over part of our next meeting any way you want based on that book. Questions you might want to raise or insights that you want to share or whatever. It doesn't have to be the whole meeting, but maybe 15 to 20 minutes of it, just leading us through parts of the book that really impressed you or amazed you or whatever. I think that would be a great way to share. What do you think, Joe? Will that work?
Sure, absolutely.
Great.
Yeah.
So I'll drop off my copy, and I don't know if you mentioned one or two others had read with you, see if they would be interested in joining with you.
Oh, they will.
Great.
How many have read it? Raise your hand if you've read it.
Reading it,
Reading,
And-
reading it now.
process, yeah.
Mine was a library book, or I'd share mine too.
So,
I'm in the midst of reading How to Be an Anti-Racist.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
That one's powerful too. And I can
There's
only
a-
kind of cover one at a time.
that's great.
There's a very good video interview
Yeah,
with the
yeah.
author of White
Yeah.
Too Long that Jerry Sokola
Yeah.
connected us all to, that's available through
YouTube. Yeah.
the National Institute of Christian, Judaic, and Islamic Studies. And in that interview, more than in the book, he gets to a little bit of a discussion about Catholics, because he comes out of a Protestant Southern fundamentalist tradition. And the interviewer is a Catholic theologian, and she's very good at dialogue with him.
Yeah, I think I have not yet really read the book, but I think information about Catholics might have been in an earlier book that he did. And so he was answering a lot of questions, but I think the information was based on his prior book.
Okay.
Oh, there's plenty of Catholic information in White Too Long. Yeah, we can't escape. Sorry.
Fortunately. The other thing I was wondering if we would all kind of want to check into Mother Mary Lang. If maybe every meeting we'll try to pick some African American or Black person of interest, that just so we can all just keep learning. And I thought that might be a good one just because the school that's going up and we could get questions about it. And then Jack Schmidt had a great idea about keeping a bibliography, which he volunteered to maintain. So after you read a book from which you think this group could benefit, if you could type like a 2-sentence synopsis and send it to him, his email address is in the directory, or you can email me. And I think that will help each of us decide which is the book I need to read. So thank you very much, Jack, for volunteering to do that.
And Peggy, thank Joe also for what he sent to us this week, Joe McNeely.
Oh, yes, Joe. I don't have you on my screen at the moment, but thank you. Skip and I plan to meet again to discuss some of the things came in after we had discussed it the first time. So we have a lot of ideas from so many of you, so we really appreciate it. And the last thing I wanted to talk about was that I've been thinking a lot about reparation and restorative justice. And we'd like to start a fund for education in the inner city, or housing down payments, or competition that awards prizes to schools to kids that know non-white privilege history. But we need a hook. Remember the Ice Bucket Challenge that started when Pete Frates and his friends had that brilliant idea for that challenge. So we need one of you creative people to come up with an idea that we can use to get something started, to start a fund. And I know a lot of organizations that would be thrilled to join us, but we need a hook. So even if you just have a little spark of an idea, if you could bring it to the next meeting and we can throw in some kindling and maybe help it to grow. But I really would like us to do something about reparations and get involved in that. So next month, we will meet virtually on November 18th at 7 p.m. And thank you all for joining this discussion. And Skip is going to say a few words about our next meeting and then close us out with the third verse of Black National Anthem as our prayer.
We thought that just to vary what we do a little bit, so it's not the same thing every time we meet, we're going to have a guest speaker. My son, Justin, who is the content writer for the Walters Art Museum, has been very much involved in this whole new movement of anti-racism. He's what they call a Xennial. I never heard of that until this week. So that's sort of in the cusp between a Generation X and a millennial. And one way to think
So
of
good
it is,
looking.
yeah, Xennials were in their childhood in an analog age, and in their adolescence and adulthood in the digital age. So they kind of waffle between. Justin is also the proud husband of my wonderful daughter-in-law, Jill. They're an interracial couple. So we thought that he might want to just share some thoughts and insights with us about two things. One, how does this younger generation that's now moving forward with the Black Lives Matter movement and anti-racism from the Black perspective differ from what many of us were doing as we participated in the civil rights era? There's some real differences in perspective that I think account for some of the real activism that you see. And the other thing might be if he and Jill just wanted to talk about what they encounter even today within their marriage to each other, that shows us that the things we've discussed tonight, institutional racism, cultural racism, are still very much alive. If you have any ideas or suggestions that you might say, well, I would like to hear him or them kind of talk about this, or I would like to have someone ask this question, please feel free to share it, because that will help shape, you know, how they talk to us and share with us. So don't hesitate, and this is a safe place, so put them on the firing line if you want, okay?
And for example, Skip, I found it interesting that Skip prefers to relate to African American and Justin to Black. And just the generational thing, it just little differences. I found that very interesting.
Yeah, because for me, if I don't believe in a race, except the human race, then I don't want to make race or color what my ultimate definition is. So that's why you see me do Black with a small b, white with a small white, not capital Black and capital white, because to me, that's making race the marker. He says African American doesn't really define him because of all the racism in America. He says we are a self-defining group. We're not really African in the sense that we come from Africa, but we've got some cultural remnants, but we really don't have cultural ties. Current African immigrants and African American Africans still have a little tension between them because there are some cultural differences. And he said, so to me, I'm a whole new thing that I can call myself. And to me, I'm not African American in the sense that you mean, Dad, I'm Black. So it's interesting, but if that'll give you a taste of kind of the ferment and the, you know, energy that's cooking in the Black community, be interesting. So if you have any ideas, thoughts, questions that you'd like to have raised, please share them and we'll put them on the firing line.
And does anybody have any now that questions tonight? Okay.
One thought that I had, most of us are all white, and be nice to put ourselves in the other person's shoe. Suppose if we were all Black, how would we feel now? And from the accumulation of 400 years, but how would we feel now if we were Black? Put ourselves in the other person's shoe and see if we can think like James Baldwin, who thought like this and kept saying that the Negro is an American problem, not ours. And until they decide how to deal with it, America will never be great again. So you get to understand James Baldwin if you put yourself in the shoes of a Black person.
And Jack Schmidt, that's a great idea in terms of the book list. James Baldwin's The Fire Next Time. And maybe also Go Tell It on the Mountain, a great novel. It's great reading if you've never read Baldwin. It's powerful.
He needs 2 sentences.
Yeah, I don't know if you talked about this the last time, and I don't mean the movie, but the book Just Mercy is amazing. It's amazing, and I read the book and then I saw the movie, but I would recommend the book. And the author is from the Eastern Shore, actually. Delaware, and winds up going to Harvard, but he just creates this whole legal movement to help prisoners, Black prisoners. And I just think, I mean, the book made me cry. I can't tell you when a book made me cry before, but I think that it's contemporary, it's true, it's nonfiction. The guy's still running this organization. And so I would highly recommend reading Just Mercy. The movie's good, but it doesn't touch the depth and the poetry and the reality of the book.
So
Thanks,
anybody who has recommendations, if you could just do a 2-sentence synopsis kind of for Jack so that he doesn't have to do that for everybody, that would be great.
Oh, good idea. Great. Okay.
Okay.
So shall we close? And you all are wonderful. What a family. This is the third verse of that very powerful anthem. God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, thou who hast brought us thus far on the way, thou who hast by thy might led us into the light, keep us forever in the path, we pray, lest our feet stray from the places, our God, where we met thee, lest our hearts, drunk with the wine of the world, we forget thee. Shadowed beneath thy hand, may we forever stand true to our God, true to our native. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Peggy. Thank you, Skip.
Thank you.
Right, thank
Joe,
you.
it's good seeing you. Joe McNeely, good to see you.
Yeah, it's good to
Yes.
see you.
Joe, good
to see you, Joe. Yeah, Joe.
Right.
Night.
Good night.
Oh, you were called,
Good night.
Dr. Barr.
Hey, Jody, good to see you too, honey.
Yeah,
Peggy,
Jody.
we'll be on the phone.
No, you can't see me, but I can see you.
Where's Rita? She just coming in, cracked me up.
No, she's been on the whole time. She was having trouble with her video.
Okay.
Sure.
But she's
I
on.
dropped out.
Hello, Mary.
Sound.
Good to see you, Skip.
Great to see. I miss you guys. I miss the choir.
Don't make us cry.
Oh, hey,
Why don't you
Dennis,
join us on
Yeah.
the coffee
could
class?
you share with me the what do you call it, statistic that you shared with me the last meeting about the real percentage of Catholics who voted for Trump
For Trump.
as opposed to
I believe the Pew Institute or Foundation said that 60% of Catholics voted for Trump last in 2016. I think that's what it was. Yeah.
Yeah, it was higher than the number I gave.
Yeah, just slightly higher.
Well, let's just hope it's not the same this time.
Yeah,
Oh,
let's hope
gosh.
so.
Oh,
Yeah.
my gosh.
I understand that in Missouri, last week, they were doing sermons. The Catholic Church was doing sermons telling their parishioners that they had to vote for Trump.
Oh, yeah. Or they go to
Yeah,
hell.
that's
Yeah, we had a person on
disgusting.
our coffee clutch that was there and they were telling us they heard that sermon and they got up and left.
Good.
And what about Cardinal Dolan in New York?
Yeah.
Oh,
I heard he
please.
did too, yeah.
Catholics for Trump.
Yeah. I was shocked that they were doing that.
Yeah.
Last election, my sister went to the Catholic Church near her, and they told people they were going to hell if they voted for Hillary.
Mhm.
Well, this was this week. I thought that we had gotten past that.
No,
But this was
Oh,
just
no.
good. I mean, Virginia wasn't deep
It's a
in
grave, it's a grave moral sin if you vote for Biden.
I think that's awful.
How sad.
It
Horrible.
really is. It's
Yeah.
outrageous.
Yeah.
There's some bishops that are speaking out against that and saying that abortion is not the only pro-life issue. I read one really good article, but there's too few.
And you know what, Jody? To me, people don't realize abortion is one side of the coin. Women's rights is the other side of the coin. And I just think men need to just shut the hell up.
Well, you know what? They should make it, if abortions were, is it sacraments?
Yeah.
Yeah. What is
I
that?
know it,
Oh,
Mary,
yeah,
If abortions
no,
were,
if men could get pregnant, abortion would have been a sacrament.
there, that's,
I
I
thought you were
love
gonna,
it.
I
I'm
thought you were
gonna
gonna say
use it.
castration would be coming
No.
into this as opposed to abortion.
I'm
Hey,
going
if
to use
abortions
that.
are
That's great.
are mortal sins, then so should vasectomies, because you're preventing kids that way too.
Yeah,
That's right.
really.
Abortions right now are at the lowest ever in this country. And the organization Planned Parenthood, what they're involved in is trying to help couples
prevent
get
pregnancy.
pregnant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
It's
educate.
total opposite.
Well, I always tell people that the bishops still haven't learned because the Catholic laity resolved the whole issue about birth control decades ago.
Yeah, what's the deal?
Right. So and they didn't learn that they need to shut up yet. Because
Hey, Skip, how's Jackie?
Jackie?
Yeah, how is she? Oh, I'm sorry, Pam. I
Pam.
don't know why I call her
I was
Jackie.
gonna say, who's Jackie?
It's too late at night.
Now
I'm
look,
sorry.
if I had answered you, really?
If you answer me,
Jackie's
I have
fine.
to call Pam.
How's Miss Lightfoot?
How's
Pam
Pam?
would have come in with the frying pan.
She's
She's doing great.
feisty as ever, right?
It's my bedtime.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. She keeps me on my toes, believe me.
Sorry.
I was strongly thinking tonight where there was an episode on PBS NewsHour about the kids, the young kids that are still separated from their family.
Yes, they are.
Oh, yes.
And talk about pro-life. I mean, it's not just the first 9 months. What about the first year 2, year 3, unbelievable.
Over 500 of them.
Yeah.
And some parents are
And
down.
some for 3 years or more.
Yes.
They can't find them. Can you
They can't even
imagine?
find
And why
the
isn't
parents.
that in the news anymore?
Why hasn't that been an issue in this election, the immigration?
Immigration.
I hope it comes up in the debates because
I do too.
that is as soon as I heard it, I thought, okay, Biden, you need to listen to this.
And if I was
Yes.
talking pro-life, like, when Trump's espousing how much he hates abortion, right?
Mm.
I'd bring up all these other pro-life issues that
Good point.
nobody talks about.
Absolutely. The death
You know, I
penalty. I mean, there's so many.
I have
Yeah.
sent the Pope's words about that, about pro-life being co-equal with abortion. I've sent the bishop that said that to my I can't say crazy, overly devotional family,
Mm.
family. And I got back, abortion trumps everything.
I know.
Now, they
Mm.
didn't say Trump,
And
but
he's
that was-
a hypocrite. He doesn't really care about that.
they don't listen.
Horrible.
They
They're
don't care.
totally closed-minded.
Yeah.
And
They've
why,
been like that all their
Irritated.
lives.
Interfere with election.
Yeah. Well, my greens calls. I'm going to go eat my dinner.
All right.
Take care.
Thanks, everybody. Good
Good night,
night.
everybody.
We'll talk
Night, all.
tomorrow, Peg.
Thanks,
Thank
Dennis, for
you.
your.
Okay.
info. All
Good
right.
seeing you.
See you all.
All right. Good seeing you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks again. Oh my
poor
God.
Peggy, I felt so bad for you. I was praying for you. So you just had to go back out and back in again?
No, that didn't work. So I went to Zoom.usa and then I said join meeting to see if I could, and then I could tell that wasn't going to work. So I got out of that. And then I thought, you know what? Today, the Zoom that we did, I was using my PA.Meyer, but this Zoom was meeting coordinators. So I went in and signed out as PA.Meyer and signed in as meeting coordinators, and it worked.
Okay.
So I've got to remember that whatever the last thing I'm signed in as, so it didn't consider me a host, so I couldn't make you a co-host. And then the other problem that happened, which I don't know why we didn't figure this out this afternoon, but when you showed your slides, because you were showing it, that's all my screen could see. I couldn't see my notes.
Oh,
So then I
my
texted you to say,
I
stop
did.
screen sharing.
It
Well,
didn't.
no, because you were do it on silent.
No, but I mean, No, but the second one did. I heard the second one come in.
Well, so I did that, and then I tried it. Of course, I can't talk because I can't mute myself because your screen is covering me. I couldn't even mute myself. So I couldn't talk. So I'm trying to type. I'll just share my own screens. And then I thought, well, that's stupid. Because if I do that, I still have to read my own sheet. So it was like, oh my God. And we plan, how much did I plan and practice and it's
Well,
still
you
true.
did great. You did great. And none of, I mean, you couldn't even tell that you were that you would have been a nervous wreck. I was thinking, oh my gosh, I was praying. And then I realized after for some reason, you know how your phone goes black? So I hadn't kept it lit up to see it. But then when you sent the second one, share, it dinged.
It did? It's not supposed to ding when you're on silent.
At least it clicked back on so I could see it or something.
It probably just clicked on and you could see it.
But then I thought there's no reason to leave the screen on. So that was stupid.
Well, that's why in my notes, I should have sent you my notes. I had stop screen sharing. Soon as, you did it on the last ones. What?
Why didn't you just say it out loud? I would have stopped it.
Well, I didn't, people were talking. I didn't want to disturb it. Plus, that first one, people were giving examples, and I thought maybe they wanted to see the things,
Yeah.
And then I stepped on Skip's toes. I got to tell him because I couldn't see my notes. So, and I wasn't sure if he was finished. And then he said he wanted to add a couple. I don't know. So then I was trying to find it, but I couldn't make too much noise with my papers, And it's like, oh my God.
It went great though.
Well, I'm glad nobody that you didn't pick that up. But if I hadn't been able to get back in, and if I see, because when I couldn't be host, I couldn't share my screen. And neither would you have been able to. So I wouldn't have been able to use the slides.
No. And then I was wishing I wanted to share this. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. No, it's not blowing up for me.
Let me see if I can blow it.
Wait a minute. Here we go. Oh, keep getting this one. There we go. Hold on. I know where it is. Wait a minute. Oh, wait a minute. I'll do it again.
That's all the white men in the boardroom.
Yeah, but I think it's so powerful.
Yeah, I've seen that one. I do like that. You can send it to me sometime.
Right. So I was thinking about, I thought I had it on my desktop. Oh, maybe I don't.
So beforehand, I wanted to discuss with Skip, but Rita was on before I was, and I got on before 1:15, and she was on. And so there were a couple people on when Skip got on, and then he was eating. But what I wanted to say is I thought we should pick a Black person every meeting to ask people to kind of research a little, just so people can start learning about these Black heroes, that nobody knows about. But I wasn't able to discuss with them. But I thought, I'm going to add it at the end anyway, because we're building a school called Mother Mary Lang, which the school that we supported is closing after a year, and our kids are supposed to go to this school over on the other side of town. So I thought that would be a good one to do. So I did it anyway.
We're very Christmassy.
Aren't we though? You look cute.
You look cute.
Thank you. Well, thank you for doing that. I
felt bad when I realized why did I keep sharing it? I mean, you hadn't told me to stop. I was thinking they were going to be on the whole time.
Well, remember I said I have written in when to stop them because I want to be able to see people.
The only thing I remember that you said is I had written in when to start them. I never heard I'd written in when to stop them.
Oh, no, I didn't write in when to start them. It was only stop them. Because I had the slide in the narrative, so I didn't have to put when to start it. Plus, that's the other thing. I never got to say to you, do you have the copy that says slide 1, slide 2, slide 3? So I didn't know if I had to say slide 1, slide 2, and slide 3, or if you had my copy that had slides in there.
No, I didn't have your copy. I mean, maybe you sent it to me, but
I sent it to you with the Zoom, remember? You asked me that afternoon. Anyway, it was fine. And now I know for next time that
So you have to do your own screen sharing? Is that what you've decided or what? Or not?
I had